What's up, guys? It's Kyle, and today I wanted to go over the second chapter of my book. It's on vocal tonality. Let me fix the light here real quick. Alright, that looks good enough. Okay, chapter 2, vocal tonality. When speaking to someone else, within seconds of meeting you, the other person will not only make value judgments about your appearance, body language, eye contact, physical contact, word usage, and posture, but they'll quite possibly most importantly judge you on the tone of your voice. At the beginner level, vocal tonality is largely incidental and almost never planned. At the intermediate level, which is not very difficult for most people to reach, there are several instruments of vocal tonality that they can use, with minimal thought and planning required on the fly during an actual conversation. That is, there are tools of emphasis and de-emphasis that can be utilized to appear remarkable. Sorry. That is, there are tools of emphasis and de-emphasis that can be utilized to appear remarkable to your audience, while not seeming too put on or artificial, untrustworthy to your audience. At the advanced level, these tools start to become second nature and start to be used without seeming artificial whatsoever, while effectively and smoothly adding power to your speech, as well as a sense of eloquence that seems to come out of nowhere. At the advanced level, people perceive a speaker as having a smooth tongue, or maybe even being a slick talker. This level of smoothness in speech can sometimes be intimidating, however, and not because of the speaker's delivery, but because of emotional attachments of the hearer to certain sounds or inflections, or even perceived personality types. At the mastery level, these tools become not instruments, but rather markers of the position of a conversation. The understanding of how the speaker is being perceived by the hearer becomes obvious, and the speaker no longer has to focus whatsoever on his vocal tonality, but rather he becomes an observer of his own interaction, smoothly blending not only an understanding of these speech markers, but also impressively, unremarkably, and most importantly, in a trustworthy way, communicating with effective elegance what the speaker wants to convey, and no more, no less. Pace of vocal tonality, like melody, pitch, and volume, conveys certain aspects not only of the speaker's words, but even their personality. People not only make value judgments about the speaker, but also personal, emotional judgments about a speaker. Pace of vocal tonality tells the listener whether the speaker is intelligent or not, whether the speaker is focused, if the speaker is calm, or if they're rushed. It tells whether a person is confident in what they're saying, and even if they already know what it is they're even talking about. That's a lot to think about, especially if you're already thinking about what it is you're saying. In order to take control of your communication and actually master your communication skills, it's important to have practiced and put together a basis of understanding regarding your vocal tonality. After sufficient control over one's own tonality is achieved, the techniques for controlling the pace of speech have been mastered, and the markers are understood well enough that they are obvious. The use of pace becomes a question of differences in pace, that is, changes in it, as well as the current pace, that is, the aspects of the pace of speech which are static. The baseline of the pace of vocal tonality. The baseline of the pace of vocal tonality is the pace at which a person normally speaks when they're communicating, and it's necessary to understand in order to establish a desired normalcy of the pace of vocal tonality, as well as a desired remarkability of that baseline pace. It's also necessary to understand and have control over the context in which the creation of desired musicality or emotional attachment during communication occurs. There are really two aspects of the baseline of the pace of vocal tonality that are worth studying and affecting. The first of these is somewhat related to the idea of conforming behaviors in the study of body language. The first is the idea that people in any given population tend to have a certain pace of voice normally during communication. This pace is influenced by a variety of factors, including educational background, dialectal background, language spoken, income level, and the location in which they learn to speak. When considering the pace of a person's speech, it's important to take note of all these factors and to class them as either remarkable or unremarkable as well as meaningful or not meaningful. When determining the meaningfulness of the background of the pace of vocal tonality, similarly to determining meaningful, remarkable, or unremarkable, when determining the meaningfulness of the background of the pace of vocal tonality, similarly to determining the nature of body language, whether it be intentional, not intentional, meaningful, not meaningful, remarkable or unremarkable, etc., it's instrumental to perform a sort of subtractive deduction. One where the unremarkable or conforming section of the part of behavior being analyzed, in this pace of vocal tonality, is subtracted from the total of the communication being observed. I'll read that again. When determining the meaningfulness of the background of the pace of vocal tonality, similarly to determining the nature of body language, whether it's intentional, not intentional, meaningful, not meaningful, remarkable or unremarkable, etc., it is instrumental to perform a sort of subtractive deduction, one where the unremarkable or conforming section of the part of behavior being analyzed, in this case the pace of vocal tonality, is subtracted from the total of the communication being observed. The other aspect we're studying and taking note of in everyday communication is that of individuality of expression. That is, what aspects of communication are unremarkable and expected given the background of the individual communicating, and which are remarkable and unique to the individual communicating, by first establishing a background of communicative tendency, and then performing the subtractive operation. Meaning in pace of vocal tonality can be compared against the background and then audited for the remaining individualistic meaning. What are the meaningful indicators in the pace of vocal tonality, and how do you recognize them? The meaningful indicators in the pace of vocal tonality are those which are remarkable, either intentional or unintentional, and separate from those which are simply an expression of the dialectal or cultural environment of the speaker. There are static vocal tonalities, or in other words, those which do not change throughout speech, and there are those which are mutable within parts of speech. Specifically, the meaningful indicators in the pace of vocal tonality are quickness, slowness, tonality which changes within individual phrasal parts, and lack of change in pace. Quickness of pace generally denotes rushed thought patterns, that the speaker wants to finish what he's saying quickly. Sorry, lost my place. Quickness of pace generally denotes rushed thought patterns, that the speaker wants to finish what he's saying quickly because he has to leave, etc. Symptoms of mania or hypomania, or nervousness. Quickness of pace that exists throughout all of the speech of a speaker may simply denote that the speaker just talks quickly normally. Without proper pitch and volume, quickness of speech generally is seen as at least a partially negative connotation within the audience. When aiming for powerful or positively perceived communication, it's necessary not to use rushed or quick pace. As this type of pace is remarkable, that means it's noticed, and may detract from other parts of speech which are intended to be noticed. Slowness of pace generally denotes, at least in part, stupidity, or other times calmness. When a speaker speaks slowly as a baseline, or in other words, throughout their communication, they're perceived as dull and not viewed as appropriate leaders. When slowness of pace is used as a change of pace, or in other words, not as a baseline, the words that are generally paid more attention to and perceived as more deliberate. Use a change of pace in speech to be more slow when communicating some part of speech which is to be taken a special note of. Lack of change of pace is seen as negatively remarkable when not accompanied by another positively remarkable element of communication. It denotes a disinterest on the part of the speaker in either the conversation, what he's talking about, or both. When no change of pace in speech is used, the hearer tends to pay attention to other elements of communication. Without other remarkable elements, what's being said tends to be ignored, sometimes altogether. Pitch and melody of vocal tonality. Have you ever noticed how when you introduce yourself to someone, they rarely remember your name on the first try? Maybe you've experienced this yourself. The reason is that people do not remember what you tell them, basically at all, in the first few moments of meeting them. The reason is that people don't remember what you say in these moments because they remember how you made them feel. Pitch is highness or lowness of tone. Melody is the rhythmic alteration of speech. Melody, specifically, is closely tied to emotionality in the speaker and the audience, perhaps more than any other aspect of vocal tonality. Musicality is the pleasantness of sound. In Western music, musical sound is based around three tones, the middle or tonic, with surrounding sounds based around the use of a scale. A scale is simply a series of notes which have a specific interval of pitch between them. When tones are played, because of the prevalence of Western music and the habituation of expected sounds in relation to the tonic, other surrounding sounds are expected. These sounds, being played or heard in a specific tritonal interval, establish a normalness or baseline of expected melody. This baseline establishes the remarkability or unremarkableness of sounds. As with all aspects of vocal tonality, this baseline is useful for determining relevance of alterations in communication and can be effectively used to understand or communicate emotionality through the use of the sound of speech. By developing a firm understanding of expected tonality versus unexpected tonality, that is, baseline versus remarkable or noticeable tonality, one can effectively use the melody of sound both as a determinant of relevance of speech elements, as well as a communication tool which is more effective than lexical or word-based delivery alone. The volume of vocal tonality. The volume of vocal tonality can be understood in three parts: softness, loudness, and change in volume. Generally, once a baseline of volume is determined in a speaker, all three aspects of volume are remarkable. The audience hearing a speaker generally considers volume to be relative to their own baseline of communication. That is, perception of volume is relative to the hearer. Softness of speech is either remarkable if the baseline of speech volume is higher than the level of softness, or unremarkable if the baseline itself is a soft volume. In other words, if someone speaks with the soft tone all the time, then that's just the basic line of their tonality, and it's not recognized in communication. Softness of speech ranges from less than normal ambient speech volume down to a whisper. When a baseline volume is higher than a change to softness of speech, an audience generally pays closer attention to the softer part of speech than to the rest of the phrase. I'll repeat that. Softness of speech ranges from less than normal ambient speech volume down to a whisper. When a baseline volume is higher than the change to softness of speech, an audience generally pays closer attention to the softer part of the speech than the rest of the phrase. Loudness of speech, as well as any change in volume of speech, is remarkable when the baseline of speech is perceived as relatively different. Loudness ranges from higher than normal ambient speech volume up to a shout. When speech volume becomes louder, an audience perceives this change as remarkable, somewhat unusual if the change is minimal, to an aggressive emotional response if the change is significantly louder than the baseline of speech. That is, someone's fight or flight response, or at least agitation, will occur if you just randomly start to yell at them for no reason. Of course, this seems simple, but it's actually very important in communication to determine the remarkability of the loudness of speech. Loudness of speech is associated with leadership when not in great excess of the baseline of normal ambient sounds. Change in speech volume is unnecessary when volume is being intentionally used as a communication tool. Unchanging volume is generally unremarkable. Melodious speech involves intentional alterations in volume as well as changes in pitch, pace, and rhythm of vocal tonality. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. That's been my second chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. DM me if you have any questions about it. I know it's a lot of information. I'm going to put it on Instagram TV so you can rewind it and listen to it again. Anyway, have a great night and check out my page. Thank you.